Okay, so the film that I chose that displays an intercultural relationship is called Coming to America. And basically, the movie is about a prince. His name is Akeem. His parents set him up. They're the king and queen of their country called Zamunda. His parents set him up in an arranged marriage. And basically, the woman is obsessed with him because he is a prince. And it freaks him out. So he flees and he goes all the way from his African country to Queens, New York. And he basically wants to just work at McDonald's, pretend to be a student, and find someone who loves him for him, not because he's a prince. So he ends up meeting this woman named Lisa, and her father, Mr. McDowell, doesn't approve of him because they don't think he's a prince. But basically, to summarize it in a nutshell, they're from two completely different cultures. She's an American woman, he's an African prince. They end up falling in love and getting married, and their cultures basically intertwine with one another. Now, chapter 8 had some good concepts, and throughout the film, you could really see some of those concepts because of their intercultural relationship. The first concept that I want to touch on is privileged, disadvantaged dialect. And that's when individuals who come from different cultures do not enjoy the same level of privilege. So Lisa was just a regular girl who had two working parents that were trying to give her the best life possible, and she lived in America. Now, Akeem is a prince. He is royalty. He's extremely wealthy. He lives in an African country. So the privilege that they experience is very different. Her father, Mr. McDowell, didn't approve of Akeem at first because they thought Akeem was just a student who was working at McDonald's. And because Mr. McDowell struggled and worked so hard to make sure Lisa had a good life, he wants better for her and wants her to marry a man where she can live comfortably. Whereas Akeem, because he grew up in luxury, he wants someone who loves him for him. He doesn't care about comfortability or anything like that. And because of their difference of privilege, because he was really wealthy and her parents struggled, their perceptions on what they want out of a marriage differs. So that's the first concept in chapter 8. Another concept in chapter 8 that was touched on in the film was submission style. And that is just a relationship where one partner abdicates power to the other partner's culture or cultural preferences. So this scene in the movie towards the end, basically Lisa, she flies all the way to Zamunda to marry Akeem and basically be the princess of the kingdom. So she leaves her normal American life back in Queens, New York, and flies and culturally gives Akeem's culture the power where she's now going to be a princess of a kingdom. So she took the submission in that relationship between their cultures. The third concept from chapter 8 that I'm going to talk about is high context cultures and low context cultures. So there was a specific scene in this movie where Akeem's parents come to Queens looking for Akeem, the king and the queen. They're in basically Mr. McDowell's house, like, where's Akeem? And Mr. McDowell's like, when he finds out that Akeem is a prince, he's like all on board. He's like, oh, Akeem's a prince? Like, well, he basically implies that Akeem and Lisa are in love and might get married. Now, when I say imply, he kind of beats around the bush and uses social cues to imply that, which would be a high context cultural style. Now, Akeem's parents, the king and queen, have a low context. So they just straight up said, our son could never love someone like your daughter. And of course her parents took offense, but what they did is they said exactly what they thought. They didn't use any type of social cues or any beating around the bush. They said exactly how they felt, straight to it, just like that. Finally, the last final concept from chapter 8 that I want to talk about is relational learning. Now, this movie has a ton of relational learning because they come from two completely different cultures. All the way down to like the way that they would say things, their slang was really different. So Akeem and Lisa really learned a lot from each other. and their relationship because they were so culturally different. And one of the biggest things that I think they learned was at the very end, when Lisa realizes that Akeem is wealthy and he could have any woman in the world, but he chose me. And then Akeem has a realization that basically Lisa loved him even when he was working at McDonald's. And I think that they learned from each other in that moment, despite of their cultural differences. Love is what brought them together. Like, Lisa was able to leave her home and be okay with that and submit to Akeem's cultural practices, and that's because they loved each other so much. So I think their different cultures allowed them to have a lot of relational learning. And overall, the film was really great, and I would highly recommend if you haven't seen it.